Oh, and Thomas just showed up. Excellent. Okay. So we're going to try Half-Life today. We were going to try Hotline Miami again, but in light of what happened in Vegas, I thought perhaps we should go for something not quite as gleefully violent. So we're going to bump up and go with Half-Life. So why don't we go around and introduce ourselves? I'm Nathan Humple. I'm a metadata librarian here at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
I'm Leah Liebzeller. I am a PhD student in the anthropology department.
I'm Josh Rivers. I'm also a PhD student in the anthropology department.
Chris Berzicki, dissertator in the English department.
Justin Shoemaker, PhD student in the English department.
Thomas Malaby, I'm a professor of anthropology here.
Stuart Moulter, professor of English. I think this is actually the English Anthropology Summit.
Yeah, it's becoming that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
That seems fine.
And that's true. But we were 3-3, but I think we've just tipped the scales.
Yeah.
Actually.
Anthropology wins again.
Yes.
Which side are you on, Nathan?
Okay, I am...
He's on the metadata side.
Yeah,
He's above
He's
everything.
on the meta side.
that's right.
Right. So
I am remaining neutral.
Crystal Malone has just arrived, so as soon as she gets within microphone shot, I'm sure we'll hear her introduction.
I can Okay.
So who has experience
Backbencher.
here with
Yes.
Half-Life? Does anybody want to start playing it? Otherwise, I'll start.
Well,
Let Crystal introduce herself real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Crystalia, lecturer in the anthropology department.
Okay.
And apparently I just tipped the scales.
Towards-
Well, let's just start the cutscene first and see how much time we have left.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, how long is it?
That is true. I'm gonna go with easy.
It's a good call.
I think, I do think, I mean, the cutscene is famous for good reason. I think it's hard to describe how revolutionary this introduction to a game seemed at the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Up to this point, you had, I'm trying to think, I mean, Quake 2 had just kind of come out, and that was probably the, because I think this is based on the Quake 2 engine, if I'm not mistaken. And that was probably the biggest, or at
Time
that
to
time,
create.
at that time, that was probably the most, technologically advanced, even though it wasn't nearly as revolutionary as the first Quake. But Quake and even Quake 2, really more about the action, and this is much more about sort of creating a story and creating an environment. I would say maybe that began with like Duke Nukem 3D, but this takes it to a whole other level, and I think it's really shown in the fact that for the first, it's like 2 minutes you're just sitting in a train watching this huge facility kind of go by you.
Look how big the levels are.
Right, yeah. I mean, it is kind of showing off, I mean, and they've got just little vignettes of people running away from a helicopter and all this, like, background information that's kind of being blabbed on about the train. So it's really setting a scene.
So there are monorail trains in Riven, I think, the sequel to Myst.
Mm-hmm.
There may be in Myst too. So, the train ride is not quite such a new thing at this point. It's almost become conventional. I mean, certainly this train ride is around for a long time when you get to Portal 2.
Mm-hmm.
When we saw that rail, I just thought, oh, rails.
Well, I mean, in amusement parks,
Yes.
the whole idea of the beginning of the ride being a kind of set of vignettes. It's really about observation and the telling of a story, and it very much has that feel.
That's also how they set up the new streets of Milwaukee.
Yes,
You
right.
walk through the trolley car, they have the vignettes of time passing through the city, and then as you exit the trolley car, which they have the motion sensors to make you feel like you're moving,
Right.
and then you get off and see the exhibit.
Yeah.
One of my proudest moments of research was taking the train in Grand Theft Auto 5. Just kind of riding the rails for about half an hour. For research.
Well, and this also, you know, is very cinematic in that it introduces a lot of what you're going to see throughout the game, too. Not that you necessarily visit any of these other levels, but you do encounter some of the machines that you're seeing and, you know, some of the facility.
You know, we haven't played Half-Life 2, but there's that interesting parallel between this train and the kind of coffin cart that you ride in the second one. Same kind of mechanic.
Although, that's at the end.
Yeah. Yep.
And you know, Valve is very aware, I think, of creating those sort of echoes throughout their games. And I think,
What's that guy's name again? The mystery guy?
oh, was it the G-Man?
Work safe. Work smart. Your future depends on it. Now arriving at Sector C test labs and control facilities.
God, what a commute we have.
Yeah. All right, well, so that's what we have for this week. So we'll... No.
And wait for a security officer to verify your identity.
Tune in next week for more pointless cutscenes.
Area for personal belongings. Thank you
This is all about the walk cycle.
and productive day.
Morning, Mr. Freeman. Looks like you're running late.
Well, yeah. This train. Alright. Oh, yeah, now I gotta wait for him. I mean, you know, this is really unusual in terms of how much time is dedicated to setting up
Oops.
the...
Oops. Sorry, he moonwalks a little bit. Sorry, I'm just...
Well, yeah, but
Setting
like...
up the org chart,
What?
like the organization of the game.
Yeah.
Because like particularly like the culture of Valve is it's like a flat space where there is no like hierarchy except for Gabe Newell.
Right.
Well, but in fine techno-liberal form in those
Yeah.
kinds of organizations. They're not alone on that.
Hey, Mr. Freeman. I had a bunch of messages for you, but we had a system crash about 4 minutes ago, and I'm still trying to find my file. It's one of those days, I guess. They were having some problems down in the test shop, too, but I think that's all figured out. They told me to make sure you headed down there as soon as you got into your cabin.
Did somebody want to check the levels of how we're talking and if we're being drowned out or anything?
That guy holds his arms like his antiperspirant hasn't dried.
This was what, 90?
Like that.
He's pixel challenged. or
Yeah, 98, I think. Does that seem right?
polygon challenge.
97, 98?
I don't know.
Let me see. That this joke is not in this game, but this reminds me of Doom 3. You start out in Doom 3, and it's a very similar thing. There's like this desk here, and there's somebody that greets you. And you can go around, and you can see what he's typing, and then he continues typing, and then at the very end, he types, "There's some guy standing behind me, and he's being really creepy." Okay.
That looks like a Lego piece to me.
It's true.
Round is very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, especially
Yeah,
in
those
this era.
the monorail tracks and everything.
Oh, I need to. That's right.
He didn't pick up his weighted companion cube. Oh, sorry, wrong game.
There's no hearts on that one. Okay. Now I can go in here, pick up my little thing. Okay.
So, how many people here played this around the time it first came out? Chris?
I did.
Nathan?
I remember going over to a friend's house and he had it, and I was just totally blown away by the intro. And then I actually downloaded the demo of it, which is totally different, which was a very unusual thing. Like, they created a whole new scenario to sort of advertise, because if they just gave you the first 15 minutes of it, it would just be kind of like, okay. But they gave a wider variety of enemies and showed off a lot of more cinematic stuff, and it was pretty impressive. And then I went to the Best Buy and I bought it for like $50 or whatever, along with the Olivia Tremor Control Black Foliage CD. And that was a good day of shopping.
It's a very vivid memory.
Yeah,
They're both great examples of their respective media.
Yeah, around the time that this came out, my first child was being born. So
Oh.
I never played this.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
I was still trying to beat Riven while the children in my family stood behind my chair and made fun of me.
You know,
There's a puzzle here, you know.
I had been out of PC gaming for a number of years, and when I was offered a cheap e-machine for
Oh,
$75, and I
Wow.
had that, and it could actually play a few things, and asked a friend what got any suggestions. I don't know anything that's out anymore. And he said, if you want the most bang for your buck, the game itself isn't all that good, but get Half-Life and you'll get all these other games that go with it. And sure enough, I mean, I don't agree with him that this was, negligible, but the mods and the side games were
Counter-Strike.
Counter-Strike is the phenomenon, really.
I'm not sure if that was out when I got it,
But it wasn't too long.
but Team Fortress was.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that, yeah. Well, that's way after Counter-Strike, I think.
I don't know. I mean, there was a lot
I'm
of...
thinking of Team Fortress 2. Sorry.
Right.
How much do we credit Counter-Strike or other games for the kind of LAN phenomenon of that era? Because that was really when I think of it. happened,
yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right around this
It was,
time.
it was that and then StarCraft.
And StarCraft, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, like, even like Counter-Strike's responsible for just like the weird industry of like internet video game cafes that just like sprung up and then immediately disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Oh, and Battlefield. That would have been the other one.
I was in Melbourne for part of 1998, and they had the game cafes just come in, and their slogan plastered on the side of every tram car was "Stop playing with yourself." That made me wonder about the Australians.
I love how they say how smart I am, and my main job in here is pushing a cart into a beam.
How many times do they mention your MIT degree?
A couple times.
And I think your degree is sitting there in the locker.
Yeah, for some reason you keep it right there. Right, yeah.
in your locker.
In
That's
your
where you
locker,
want to
yeah.
keep your degree.
Just like you're in high school, you know, you sort of put the little award you got or something right there.
Every day he kisses it with his fingers.
Okay, so what are you actually supposed to be doing?
I will show you.
Yeah, you're getting close to the
Though I will
experiment
say,
thing.
you know, one of the least MIT people I can think of is Nick Montfort, but he has the ring. He does have the ring. Yes.
I never got a Harvard ring.
So press this button. Ladders in games have always been like the worst. This is like I can never like you get down here and then you're like, okay, wait, oh no! You run back up. I don't know why they had such trouble with ladders in games, and I still don't think they've really perfected it.
Well, you know, you're not running the leg animation, right? So sensing when body has reached floor is problematic, I guess.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, I think. I mean, even now, a lot of first-person games, you're still kind of a floating head.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Well, this looks all very routine. What could go wrong?
Exactly.
That whole kind of idea of like multiple beams. I think of, you know, Ghostbusters. I think of many things that I identify it with a particular era of like science fiction. Like, you know, something really serious is going on when you've got like 3 beams of plasma all involved.
Here we go.
don't cross the streams, whatever you do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Same thing. Right. They all come together. Maybe that's where it started.
Sorry.
There's some voice acting.
Is it from the era when it was all just employees?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. You're not paying the high dollar for talent at that time.
I remember
was awesome.
like one of the first one of the first times I heard about, you know, voice acting in games, like as a major part of it was King's Quest V. When it first came out on CD.
Huh.
And I never got to listen to it when it initially came out because I didn't have a CD-ROM and, you know, whatever. And then after a number of years, I think King's Quest VI came out, and that was a huge game in terms of like the hype that went into the cinematic qualities. And then I went back and listened to the voiceovers in King's Quest, and they sounded terrible because they must have been like recorded in a bathroom or something. Like, they're like, we have the room on this CD to put in voice, to put in like digitized sound, and we're gonna do it.
Yeah.
And you know, that's about as far as it got, which was enough because that was, you know, a huge thing.
My guide to the game industry back in Baltimore was a fellow who'd won an award for audio design in a game. It was one of the first games where the character, it was a you know, military shooter game. Your character could get tired or hurt, and he had them dub all the lines in like 17 variations, depending on your physical state. You think
wow.
today,
Yeah,
oh, well,
right.
that's a natural, but you know, Chris was one of the first people to do that.
Yeah, I think of like Baldur's Gate and all those games with that, you know, all the different audio files for all the different characters in your party, and yeah.
I can never get into Neverwinter Nights for that reason. The voices were so...
The voices were really, really not good. They were much better in Baldur's Gate than they were in It's true. Yeah, back when this came out, I was playing a lot of Daggerfall, actually.
That was after that. Oh no, Daggerfall. That's right. That was around the same time.
Right around the same time as
Yeah.
when my kid was born.
And that had a live action intro. Daggerfall did, and that was a huge game.
I love the customizability of that game. That was really good.
Can we go wrap on the cages with the hockey thing?
Oh, access denied. Oh, okay.
Is that guy going to come out of the broken one?
Nah, he's just gonna hang out there. I don't have a crowbar yet.
I've never seen this game before.
So what do you think?
I mean, it looks old.
Oh,
old.
you know what? I gotta
Yeah.
remember that I need to quick save. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to start the whole thing over again.
I think the first computer game I ever
So glad
played
you
was
thought of that.
Final Fantasy XI.
Mm-hmm.
So having that be the first and then come back and look at something like this, it's just kind of like, wow.
The first, you
That's
said the
what
first
people
computer
did back
game.
in the day.
Quick
So
save is
has this
F6.
already happened? I mean, obviously, 8-bit kind of graphics and that those nostalgic, arcade console type graphics are a thing, right? Has it happened that this kind of graphics has become a nostalgic thing yet? I can't think of any examples.
Well, I can think of a
Yeah.
couple, and it just sort of started.
Sure.
There were wait a minute. Is there?
Steam games.
Whoops. Oh.
Well, okay, so there's games that are going to use this kind of thing because there's a cheapness of production
Yep.
value to
Yeah.
it, right? But I was thinking more in the idea of like,
retro.
the nostalgia retro
Yeah.
kind of thing playing into it.
There's a game called what's it called? It just came out fairly recently, and it sort of uses the aesthetics of a 90s game like Quake in that big chunky thing.
Yeah.
And it's let's see, it's Strafe. Is the
I
name
get
of it?
nostalgic for the laser conduits on the wall.
But I don't. I think
Like something from
that
Georgia Tech.
when you see the retro pixel art, there's certainly you can definitely.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Sorry.
You can definitely see an appeal to the artistry in that, like the pixel art, because you have this. It's like any sort of art where you have this very limited palette.
Hello.
And
But wait, he's a scientist. He has a white coat.
he's just.
That looks like a
Oh, that
security
was-
guard that was like, oh, that's not happening.
That was.
Also an abdomen full of teeth, but
That's just Jeff. He's just really ugly.
Just trying to find the bathroom.
Is part of what's going on here the expression of that rise of the kind of anti-science, anti-academic? Is that really what's going on here?
Yes.
No, because
Check
you're
out that
MIT
flag we
grad
just
that's
picked.
saving the world.
Oh, that's true, yeah. But MIT is different, maybe. For the techies, for the programmers, MIT is,
It's not science.
it's up on a hill, it's bathed in golden light, Although I will share, it's kind of not safe for work type comment, but I will share that one of my brothers worked in the tech industry around Boston around this time, actually. And at his little startup, he got word one day that they were going to have somebody joining the company who had a PhD, and realized this is my brother talking to me at that moment, writing my dissertation. And he says to me, well, you know what PhD stands for, don't you? And I said, what? And he said, fucking dick. And I was like, what the hell, man? It's like a drive-by. Like, why, But I took it as he was saying very much from an industry point of view.
Yeah.
Like, that's where he was coming from on it, right? Is that the programmer kind of guys like he was, like, saw the more academically oriented and minded of computer science era as, assholes.
waste of
essentially.
skin.
Yes.
I don't think that's actually gone away.
No.
Yeah, I don't think it
At
has
all.
either. Yeah, for sure it hasn't.
I actually probably started a collection of this, like all the scenes and tropes of like the classroom, how they factor into like Fallout 3, Fallout 4.
right.
This classroom is a
I gotta say, sorry to interrupt, but that gunshot sound is really somebody going.
Pew pew.
Whoa!
Oh, good.
Well, you know, I
Really?
should be using
Yeah.
my crowbar. It's
You'll hear
interesting.
it
You know,
now.
the other thing that's interesting, like, I have 4 bullets left. You know, you don't have, at this point in the game, you really do not have a lot of resources. You should be using your crowbar.
Yeah. I can get all the way through a Bioshock game with just a crowbar.
Oh, you want to
On
play
easy.
this?
It's not a Bioshock game.
Ah, I see. Chris, anyway, you were saying taking an inventory of, like, the tropes.
Classroom scenes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just classrooms always seem to be the place where the indoctrination sort of happens in a lot of these games. I'm not sure if there's anything in here, but you know, just like even if it's just the elements that are on the wall. But I mean, Fallout is the first example.
Oh, doesn't work. So yeah, now we're actually getting into the meat of the game, and it really starts you out slow. I think that's the other thing in terms of like having only 4 bullets. It's still not. It hasn't turned into a big action game.
There's another thing to think about historically. When is the first time we started to see, well, probably in Quake, evidence of carnage? You know, corpses, blood spatters.
Oh, I would say Doom.
Doom.
Wolfenstein.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
Wolfenstein, right.
Although the thing with Doom that was striking was if you shot either a rocket at somebody or there was a barrel, they would they would gib. They would turn into little bits of meat, and I think that was the first time that happened. But now we're seeing like blood on the walls. Can I not go in here? What's happening?
Well, it's literally your ability to assign a texture on the fly.
Are you
Did
kidding
it
me?
just died at the door?
I did. Where was the last? Oh, for God's sake! All right,
Oh, no, door death.
Now you have more bullets.
that's true.
And the blood's still there, so.
Oh,
Oh, come on. That was in your sight. There you go.
now I have less bullets. All right,
There he is over there.
let's see him.
Danger, falling mainframes.
Die. Okay.
Was this marketed as a horror game?
No, and in fact, a lot of the marketing that I recall that it was surrounded by was how many options you had, or like the AI of the enemies, like which was very impressive. If you were hiding behind something, they'll throw a grenade at you. They won't just like keep shooting at you, which at the time was incredibly impressive. So I think it was like the destructible environments. I don't feel like games were marketed as like in the subject matter a lot. Like this was an action game,
But I do think of the subject matter also in relationship to the late 90s, right? When it seemed the focus of a sense of imagined threat, shifted to government conspiracies and aliens, right? X-Files and things like that, right? This is very much in keeping with that.
Yep.
Okay, let's try this again.
Though I have to say, the face huggers, right?
Yeah, and aliens
all the way
and
back
all
to
that.
Alien.
Yeah,
You know?
for sure. Well, it was kind of.
What, 78?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. The whole alien grammar, or whatever you would call it, or the visual language of aliens, the logic of how they work, idea of hives and stuff like that, and that all kind of dominated everything for the time.
And these critters, which always sort of look like interior anatomy, and I don't know.
H.R. Geiger, people like that, artists
Yeah.
like that, were
Or
that influenced Alien.
when's the Naked Lunch movie? That's from the. Yeah, it's a mid-90s.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're not dead. All right, so we got some people being a
Sure
little
to
more
save from time to time.
quiet. So, Crystal Lee, Leia, what are you thinking when you're watching this? Anything even remotely interesting so far?
Yeah, I have to say, I'm sitting next to Krista Lee, and I'm seeing her kind of look at it like,
Right, so
like what could possibly be the appeal?
So here's the thing with games like this, and I feel like this is my weakness as a game scholar. So this game came out before I ever had a computer.
Mm-hmm.
And so when anything like the references to like anything that happened in the 90s, I only really know about through reading books that Thomas assigned when I was a student. Right? So this is actually kind of weird because it's like I have read about this game.
Right.
But it's always been this abstract thing in a book trying to make a different point. And this is the first time actually being like, oh, that's the thing that people were talking about.
What? Can you give me an example of like what was written about it that you're kind of seeing?
Do you have anything?
Good.
Like I know, like I have memories. I know I've read things about this game. I know I've heard things about the game. I don't remember anything offhand.
Alexander Galloway talks about not Team Fortress,
Counter-Strike.
Counter-Strike, in pretty extensive detail.
Yeah, I think that was what a lot of the literature that led you to know the name of this game was. It was the stuff on Counter-Strike and the modding and the
That
LAN.
could be.
Yeah, that's true, and I think that kind of shows that's totally PC games, is the modding community and how that was built up around this time, various reasons, the internet and everything. And Doom certainly did that as well. I remember I had a. I had a book on. This is actually kind of interesting how this just sort of slips through. But I had a book on creating Doom levels, and it had all this software on it. And it had a whole bunch of levels for Doom in it. One of which was an Alien total conversion for Doom, which was excellent. But it's interesting that was even distributed because it had a bunch of copyrighted material from the movies. But that was one of the ways that these things were distributed because it was sort of that paying attention to that type of copyright wasn't nearly as important at that point.
So all of my friends are really into Half-Life 2.
Okay.
I've never talked about Half-Life very first one.
And now see, that's interesting too, because like this was a great game when it came out, and I was in the waning, probably the last year of high school is when I got it, and then like the last year or maybe the year after I graduated from college is when Half-Life 2 came out, and it had been anticipated forever. And I was not that impressed by it because at that point it had a lot of the things that
More of them raining down.
yeah, no kidding. I think they're supposed to stop, but they're not. A lot of the things that had really struck me about Half-Life had become pretty rote in terms of the first-person shooters.
This is how they're populating the level you're getting to.
Yeah, no kidding.
You're also having fun.
I mean, that
Like
does
otters,
look like fun.
yeah.
Right, and you're going to shoot these playful creatures.
Oh, crap.
Monsters.
The thing about Half-Life 2, though, was it a lot of the things that it promised to do had come out in other games like the ragdoll physics, that was going to be the big thing. The more realistic textures in a lot of these games. Painkiller came out with this ragdoll physics shortly before that, so maybe there was this rush. So by the time Half-Life 2 came out, it was like, okay.
Yeah, well, and they also, before that, Halo had come out, and that had kind of changed the way that you played these games because it only let you have 2 guns at a time, which sounds like kind of a silly restriction, but it really changed how you managed and how you strategized playing these games. And Half-Life 2 didn't have that. But, which isn't to say that Half-Life 2 isn't a great game and wasn't a huge hit. It definitely was. But, and the other thing that it revolutionized was the distribution, because Half-Life 2 came out with Steam. And that was a huge controversy, because it was like, what? I have to be connected to the internet to play a single-player game?
Yeah.
It's interesting that was a thing, because by the time I got Steam, I took for granted that, of course, you're always connected to the internet. Why would that be an issue?
Oh, that's funny, because I still kind of, it rankles me a little bit.
Yeah, I've tried to buy more games on Good Old Games and these others that let you
get it free.
Yeah, at least download it.
Right.
Yep.
Well, that, that gets to some really, fundamental issues about ownership, right, and property, and licensing versus actually owning a game.
Yeah, we've always had to have implants to play games, haven't we?
Yeah.
No, but so it makes a difference. So I got my first computer, I think, in like 2000, and I lived in the dorms and had a T1 line, and that's my first experience of both computers and internet. So, because I've read, I get the jokes about dial-up tones and some of the old games. I will understand what people are talking about, but I have no first-hand experience all of these things.
And you don't understand the joy of connecting a Xbox original with Halo to your dial-up connection to play online.
No. I've used a dial-up once when I was visiting somebody else. This is, again, after having lived in the dorms and having the T1. And it was the most infuriating thing ever. I don't understand how people got anything done. You wasted so much time just sitting there.
Yep.
Quite slowly.
My first wife used to call it talking to the moon when the modem would make those sounds.
I remember I downloaded Quake. I downloaded Quake. It took all night to download Quake, and it didn't even work on my computer because I didn't have a floating point processor.
Oh.
Then you didn't have a computer, but
I really didn't.
You had an adding machine, but.
Well, this was around that time, after I, where I started to not be able to have something that was up to the graphics card it needed and all of that. There was this whole era where I was shut out of the latest games because I never had the PC that could really run them.
Yeah.
Oh, that I need.
On the flip side, that's when it started for me. Well, Half-Life 2 in particular was one of those where, it was Elder Scrolls. The realistic water effects, you have to see those.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, well, I guess I better go buy that new video card.
Yeah, that Morrowind with the water effects.
Yeah,
I remember that.
It's Crysis for me.
Yeah,
right, where procedural lighting and palm fronds that wave. And
that was the whole era, right? Where it was the fidelity was sort of dominating the what you were getting more of in one title to the next.
Because in gameplay, it's still this game.
Well, actually, that's an interesting point. I didn't even think about this, but I recently read something on Rock Paper Shotgun that it was kind of a reflection. I don't even think it was very long, but it was kind of a reflection on the impact of Half-Life. And they pointed out that it's fun, it's great revisiting it, but you see how it kind of ruined first-person games because the emphasis on large levels and battlegrounds is completely lost here, and it's a much more linear experience, emphasizing big what do they call it? Big set pieces. So you have later in this game, there's that huge level where you've got the monster that senses sound or something, and it's this huge set piece, and you got to fight him. But before that, the emphasis was on the levels, and it was finding keys, which was kind of a pain, but it allowed you to have these different arenas instead of this game. So people, it kind of ruined it. I don't want to say it ruined it, but it definitely changed it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because at the other end, around this time, like we mentioned Daggerfall before, you start to have procedurally generated dungeons, right, and places to go, and so it's like, because all the money was going to the graphics people. You couldn't hire people to do good level design too,
Well, but now it's definitely. Procedurally generated stuff is where it's at. Oh shoot! Of course.
Well, for similar reasons, right? I mean, well, and it's not just for saving money. There's also that desire to create a kind of endlessly playable landscape. Skyrim is that descendant of the Daggerfall, right, where you can always find a new dungeon.
But then it goes too far in the, I'm trying to think of the name right now, where they were generating new planets, and it was supposed to No Man's Sky, which when they were advertising it, everyone was like, oh my god, this is going to be amazing, I'm going to buy it, and a bunch of people I know bought it, and they played it for a couple of days, and they're like, this is terrible.
It's better now.
But that
Is
had,
it?
That wasn't to do
Okay.
with the procedurally generated worlds. That was just because they made a bunch of promises about aspects of gameplay and sort of left that behind. So you had this sort of lack of quality gameplay and a ton of procedurally generated worlds. But what are you going to do with them?
Yeah.
Well, right. So I mean, the procedurally generated worlds were useless, because that was a lot of the emphasis on the advertising, right?
Yeah.
So everyone just got caught up in that, and then realized oh wait, that doesn't actually matter if you don't have a game to play.
Well, and I think that players, through a kind of what Silence calls practical reason, they're noticing that.
I know what I'm doing.
They're aware of what the kind of implicit economic argument is. They're aware that, all right, procedurally generated stuff, that's cool, and that kind of creates a lot of replayability and a lot of saves you a lot of money in production. So you better be giving me the other stuff, because you saved some money on that side of things, And I think it's doubly disappointing when, the stuff that is supposed to be handmade, you might say, isn't done well.
Well, but I think you're right, that a lot of that problem was that they promised a lot. This is a Peter Molyneux problem. They promised a whole bunch of stuff, and the videos that they showed off had, a lot of different fauna, that just never showed up in the game. And so when people were going into it, they expected, I think best show off, what showed this off was they showed a trailer and they played the Jurassic Park music, and it was because there was this big brontosaurus creature, and it was just beautiful, it looked amazing. And then they showed, because all the creatures are procedurally generated too, and they showed an actual dinosaur-like thing, which sort of it looked like one of those T-Rex suits, but even worse in the game. And they played this harmonica version of Jurassic Park, because it had that same type of disconnect.
Well, I want to point out too that there's a whole thread of history and ideas around Silicon Valley on this particular point, right? So Second Life itself was originally dreamed to be, by Philip Rosedale, a fully procedurally generated, emergent, evolving world that users, he was not imagining a community, he was not imagining users doing anything but going in there and looking at cool stuff that had been emergently produced, and maybe they'd have some BattleBot type suits, and they'd fight each other for some reason. That's part of what. So it was actually at a investors meeting with, I think, Mitch Kapor, that they showed some of the early stuff. They had an ocean that would flow across the servers, and they were showing that. And they were showing some of this early, and they had the employees. They were showing Linden guys with their little avatars working on the world. And that's when Mitch said, well, that's what you should be providing to users, is they can go in there and make stuff. So that was what pushed the ship. But this idea that you get this kind of emergent complexity in all these different kinds of games we could think of, and there was the Will Wright one, Spore. That is a big theme amongst a certain set of Silicon Valley idea people,
Well, as a social space, these environments, they're trying to make like Facebook. It's just another form of social media, and they want you to spend as much time as possible in those places. So
scientists.
they give you all these different reasons to spend,
Oh.
your free time in there.
Yeah.
You have, like No Man's Sky. One of the ways they corrected that was to enable players to take snapshots and take pictures within the space, and you get the cinematographer cam or whatever the heck it's called. But you want to feel like you have some type of impact, even if it's only capturing a screenshot.
Right.
You want to come out of there feeling like you've had some type of impact on that environment.
Well, and that was another thing that was disappointing to people about No Man's Sky, was that because you can do some like terraforming in it, but some people found each other on it within like the first week or so, and they went to the same planet, and somebody was terraforming or moving things around, and the other guy couldn't see it, because that's not how the game was set up, even though that's kind of what they promised. So, yeah, when I heard about No Man's Sky, I was like, oh, they're going to totally Molyneux this up. Because I'm used to, like, Peter Molyneux's promising, like, the world, in black and white and Fable and all this other stuff. And the practicality just gets in the way. It's just not possible. And I think that was the same thing with No Man's Sky. And the other thing was, like, well, what are you supposed to do in here?
Black and white worked for me.
Well, that's another problem, because, like, it was promised to be one thing, but it ended up being something else, and something else was pretty good.
Right, and it's almost the William Blake problem. You're up the devil's party. It's really good to be on the dark side in that game, and really hard to be on the other. It's kind of boring.
The shotgun.
Or I think it's
Oh, this is a shotgun. Look at
that's
that.
a shotgun?
Yeah, it's just
It's a militarized shotgun.
Okay.
What silly noise that will make.
It's like it has two barrels in it.
Nothing. Huh. That's delayed. Okay.
Hypersonic shotgun.
A little while ago.
But there's another thing that comes in with that idea of user creation, alongside that kind of valorization of people will get together and they'll make stuff, is the idea that it will somehow be beautiful and be better than because it's the crowd, right? So they're just waiting for a chance for their creativity to be realized, and that was a significant, more than a significant, it was the overriding lament of Linden Lab, looking at Second Life within the first couple of years of its life, is that users were not making beautiful things. And they created this whole new island with this big backstory to it, all around the idea, and with like some sample pieces of architecture and textures and stuff like that. They would hope that users were going to go in there and make some beautiful, cool stuff. But no, they just
another T-Mobile station.
Right. They made more stores and more like flashy things to get people's attention, and
Makes me think of Ted Nelson has apologized for the World Wide Web. Like, I didn't do that, but people just took my ideas and went, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I always think of that as a Nelson moment.
So what happened? The difference between like Second Life and Minecraft?
Yeah. Right.
Where Minecraft, people came out and made these
they're
elaborate structures,
and
they could host their own
retro
server.
games.
That's a big part of it, right?
Yeah,
for a long
that's
time,
part-
Second Life
part
was
of it.
insisting on everything being under one server, and that was a huge conversation within the company, and they were under pressure to license it out as well to private entities like Wells Fargo and people like that. Let them run their own little version of Second Life with their branded as such and not branded as Second Life. But that kind of ran against these principles, these kind of Burning Man type principles that Philip worked under. So that was the main difference, I think. But on top of that, Minecraft made a set of, and I'm not an expert on it, but it seems to me that they made a set of architectural choices that were much constrained the world, made a lot of choices that made a lot of performance possible. That Second Life was kind of hampered and hamstrung in some ways by some early architectural choices about rendering at a distance and stuff like that, that just created enormous demands on the client hardware of everybody who was in view of any avatar with anything animated. You know, these things, and it was just it was kind of built in, and they had a very hard time undoing it. Oh, where'd he go?
Ah!
I'd say this is the first game we've played that Nathan didn't quickly give up the keyboard.
I'm sorry, does anybody else want it?
No.
Ah, damn it. I do think it's interesting that we have this historically significant game, and we've ended up talking about Second Life. And I'm not complaining. I just think it's interesting because I think sometimes with these games like this, there's almost not that much to say, especially in the single player environment, the earlier ones. What?
You're gonna want to duck under that fan.
Okay, thanks. I thought I ducked.
So, because I get backwardly into this game through Portal,
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like getting an introduction to Superman through the Bizarro universe. It's literally that, because I really think that that's what the Portal games are. But the fact that this mythos is big and old enough to have generated its own parody universe is really interesting. Maybe it kind of makes it impossible to think about it per se until you...
Well, I think the better game is really the Portal games at
Yeah.
this point. And I don't know if that's too much of a controversial opinion, because it's just, these games, we get essentially a new Half-Life game every year in either Call of Duty or Modern Warfare. It's a very story-driven, single-player, linear game. That's kind of a pain in the
The
ass.
Portal and Half-Life are very different.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Like,
In fact, the most enjoyable things for me about Portal are those narrative and those like kind of homages to this universe. I mean, I like the puzzlers, but those are the things that usually make me go, eh.
I mean, the stuff like maybe Black Mesa.
Yeah.
Fat Chance, kind of that kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I think what I was taking from what you're saying, Nathan, is that noticing that Portal has this kind of contained quality to it.
yeah, I think that's it too.
It's
Yeah.
not trying to be about saving the world. It's not trying to be about something cosmic.
It's about testing.
It's about it's about humanity in that sense. Like, here's what happens when a group of people get caught up with a particularly twisted set of priorities and ideas and aspirations. And it says a lot about tech companies in its own way, I think, especially in Portal 2, where you really get the
Game
backstory.
companies.
Game company, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more things that are going on that are interesting in Portal.
Valve.
Mhm.
I think kind of like Gone Home too. There's the depth of the puzzles and how they're intertwined with this loose narrative are so deep that you can go to various layers. Like the cake, or
Yeah.
what's inside the cubes.
Right.
All these things that are either fan generated or there's a lot of opportunity there to go in and say, even if with a puzzler as tight and constrained as Portal, you can still come out of it going.
So yeah, I'd be interested to hear, from folks here who do more of that, the English side of things, on this kind of question. Like, it seems like it happens a lot, the kind of Portal thing where a kind of whimsical, light amount of gesturing and kind of evocative elements, narratively, image-wise, are much more fertile ground. If the gameplay is good and people want to find a way to invest more meaning in it.
Yeah, I don't think you can get to Portal without this, though.
Mm-hmm.
You need this fairly crude comic book universe before you can do interesting things.
With the sort of less pressured version of it.
And actually, I mean,
I don't know.
I'm inclined to think that the Bizarro universe, which comes from the mid-'60s, is DC's response to Marvel coming on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, the Portal games are much more like Marvel as opposed to 60s DC.
Right.
Which always had this kind of button-down collar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of, being on the lookout for any project or person that takes itself too seriously.
You're talking about the big one, you move it
that's
over and then you can get to the ladder?
Yeah, the little
internet
cube. I
and
thought
tech culture
right,
as
that
it
guy
is.
all the way over to the other side.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
Well, because I got up here.
No, I meant you take the little one all the way back over to where you were trying to get into the other air vent where you got your shotgun.
I don't think so, but maybe.
Maybe you go in.
Right in that part of it.
Because I'm up here and there's a
Event you
grate,
can't destroy.
but I can't destroy it.
Oh, there you go.
I shot that thing like
so
3
many times. I know.
And you ducked under the fan, too.
That's how we got here.
This is why I don't like playing.
With others.
Ah!
Oh.
That seems like Portal.
Oh.
I think he was meant to do that. I don't.
Right. Yeah, you're not allowed to kill him yourself. Ooh. Careful, dude.
Damn. All right, let's try that again. Actually, it is now 3 o'clock.
Almost
3 o'clock. What have we learned?
I mean, you're absolutely what I think about this game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this game is like 90% of the other games that but I also started with like Mass Effect. So that was one of my first introductions to games. Something like kind of Portal as well. And so this is just kind of like, oh, so this is where they started.
Yeah.
That's what I get.
It's kind of like going back to a silent film, like.
I mean,
Exactly.
the guys who did the first-person Scholar books would talk about this stuff in terms of like embedded narrative, because that's what the Half-Life stuff really was when it first started. Like, there was very little like overt storytelling. It was lots of sort of like find the story experiences, which you sort of see trickle down into stuff like BioShock and Mass Effect with like their like encyclopedic approach to world building, where you just find these like codexes after codexes and like console entries that just like fill the world up.
That also in Mist and Riven.
Yeah.
And Daggerfall.
And Daggerfall. And Skyrim. Certainly Skyrim.
Skyrim, man.
And
books.
and ultimately in Gone Home.
Yes. Right.
Oh boy. Oh shit. Sorry. Just realized I'm at 11 degrees Celsius.
It's not network television.
Yeah. I also, it's interesting because most first-person shooter games now are very cover-based, and so if you are low on health, you just hide,
And then your screen stops being red.
Right, exactly. Which is a totally different approach. You actually have to find help in this. Okay, so that was Half-Life. Next week, I don't know, maybe we'll do Hotline Miami.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. We'll see. We haven't done it for 2 weeks in a row.
That
Maybe
should be
we'll.
the meme of the show.
Right.
Always
next week we'll do
Hotline
Hotline
Miami.
Waiting for a week of no gun violence in the United States.
Oh, that was.
Good
Does
luck.
anybody watch BoJack Horseman? Because there was a there was an episode that was the central gag. That they were trying to release a violent movie, and they just every week there was another mass shooting. Anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, and then the other thing up on the docket is Fate of the World, which I have never heard of. Who?
That was probably one of mine.
Okay.
We don't have to play that. That's a card-based serious game that, in case you ever feel like playing politics and world disasters, and with an incredible learning curve.
Oh.
Too soon, I want to say.
It's always too soon for that. Well, we'll see. Let's say Hotline Miami, and maybe we'll change it. So thanks everybody for coming, and goodbye.